welcome to the Australian Journal of Environmental Education Biennial Research Symposium and the launch of our most recent special issue. This is an inaugural event and we're very excited about opening today in October 22. As we proceed, we'd like to begin with a spirit of reconciliation by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we gather. Today, I'm coming to you from Wurundjeri country. We respect all elders and ancestors and any First Nations people here with us today. We recognise their continued connection to the land, air and water, and acknowledge that they never ceded sovereignty. So please acknowledge your traditional owners by naming your country in the chat. That way we can get to know where you are. And Sandra has set a fabulous example. Thank you, Sandra. So today we mentioned that we are launching our special issue in our first ever research symposium for AJEE. My name is Dr. Peter White. I'm the current editor-in-chief for AJEE, and we are part of a fabulous community. I will introduce you to some of our AJEE colleagues soon. The Research Symposium is a new initiative for the journal, and it's really intended to bring together our community. Obviously, we have a number of authors. We also engage a number of volunteer reviewers to support our journal process, but we are a broader community. AJEE is the journal of the Australian Association for Environmental Education, or A²E², as we like to call them. And so in support of our host organisation, we decided that we would offer a biennial research symposium. And in the other year, there is a research symposium connected with the Australian, with A²E²'s conference. So we really wanted to be a part of A²E² and support our community in that way, but not by doubling up. So hence the biennial nature of this focused symposium. And this year it aligned perfectly with us wanting to celebrate and somewhat officially launch our most recent special issue. And the special issue is the Post-Qualitative Inquiry, Theory and Practice in Environmental Education. And the guest editors were Emeritus Professor Paul Hart. Paul, I'd like to welcome you to proceedings today. Thank you very much for being here.
Thanks.
As we proceed, I guess we'll tell you a lot more about the special issue, but it was made available to you today. And so that's really very exciting. I'm also going to share with you a little bit of information about AJEE so that you can appreciate, I guess, who you might be becoming a part of or joining our community. You'll notice in the special issue, I've just popped the link in the chat, that all of the papers in this issue are available online. And we would like to thank Cambridge University Press for making that significant contribution of availability to everyone. So some of these papers will normally be held behind a paywall, but all papers in this special issue are freely available until April next year. And that's really wonderful and denotes the kind of relationship that we have with our Cambridge University Press colleagues. I'll again share a little bit more about that in the future. First of all, I'd like to share a little bit about the journal. So I've mentioned that we are proudly hosted by A²E² and we publish with Cambridge University Press, and we enjoy a very close and very successful relationship with them. AJEE has just become a gold open access journal, and currently we're publishing 4 issues a year. We have an editorial executive. Many of them are here this afternoon, which we're very excited about. Hilary, thanks for being here. Fabulous to see you. Give us a wave so everyone can appreciate you. I noticed Marianne is here. Hi, Marianne. Blanche, hi, Blanche is here. Fantastic. Joe Ferguson is here. Scott Jukes is here. We have apologies from Kat. It's a tough time of day for our Canadian colleagues, so just a special shout out to Paul for being here with us. And we have other oh sorry, Sandra, my goodness, Sandra is here. And now help me team, have I missed anyone? Georgia is an apology. She wanted to come. It was a bad time of day for her. So we are the editorial executive. And I wanted to shout out to our Cambridge University Press editor, Jamie Davidson, who sends his apologies for today, but was anticipating being here. We also wanted to acknowledge our AJEE editorial board. Our board is 34 academics strong. And of course, as you can see here, international and very well regarded in our field. And so thank you very much to our board members. We have Annette with us. Paul is a board member, and Joe Ferreira is here. Hi, Joe. Great to see you. Let's see. Have I missed anyone? Help me out, team. Chris Eames. My goodness, Chris Eames is here. Helen is here. Helen Quidit-Winton. Fantastic. Great to see you. Efrat, you're here. Fantastic. Thank you. Have I missed anyone?
Annette Goff.
I've mentioned Annette. Pauline, Paulina. Yes, absolutely. Missed you. Sorry. Thank you. So yes, great to have you support the journal in so many ways. So acknowledgement and thanks. A couple of details about what we've been up to this year, and we'll end this session later today with some of the things that we're going to be up to in the next few years. I've introduced you to our editorial executive. We're 9 members strong, and we have roles and responsibilities within that, all to enable our developing community. We were pleased that AJEE was included in the call agreement, which facilitated our open access publication. But more importantly, we were pleased that A²E² supported the journal to flip to gold open access. This year, we've established a diversity and inclusive and equity policy, and we're really quite proud of that piece of work. It necessitated revised author instructions to provide greater clarity for authors and reviewers, and we look forward to seeing how that plays out for our whole community into the future. We're enthusiastic about supporting authors who maybe don't write in English to be successful in publishing in our journal, and we have some protocols and policies in place to enable that. I've mentioned we're 4 issues a year. This year, we've already hosted 2 special issues. I'm pleased to see Blanche is here. She was the guest editor with Alicia Flynn of our first issue in volume 38, which was a special issue on School Strike for Climate, a reckoning for education. I strongly encourage you to have a look at that special issue. It's still, of course, located on our Cambridge University site, and available, quite a few of those articles are available free of charge as well, or in open access. And then today we're launching our second double issue, special issue, the Post-Qualitative Inquiry, Theory and Practice in Environmental Education. And of course, today, our biennial research symposium. So there's some of the things that the journal has been up to, and we'll, as I said, close out at the end with a few things that we've got planned coming in the future that we would like you to know about and potentially be involved with. Our program today is as follows. We will provide an overview of the special issue. Thanks, Paul. We'll then go into 2 sessions where we hear from 3 of our authors from the special issue, and then we'll go into a discussion. Depending on our numbers, we'll go into breakout rooms, and in the breakout rooms, we have the opportunity to do some collaborative online sharing via Jamboard, and then we'll come back and do a quick bit of sharing just so we all get a sense of what the conversations were like, and then have a quick break and come into a repeated session with 3 other fabulous presentations before wrapping up for the day. So this is our program. So now I would like to hand over to Paul and have him welcome and officially launch, yes, that's your role, Paul, our special issue. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much. I hope my voice holds out. Well, I want to say to PETA and to all of you that I very much enjoyed working as an editor on this special issue. And I think I must say that I found it difficult, somewhat difficult to capsulize a very complex, large and complex evolution of thinking about educational research. What was it that Robin Williams said? Sort of giant cosmic powers, itty bitty living space. As I see it, this SI, the special issue, invites readers into an assemblage of creative starting points for post-qualitative inquiry. Lisa Mazzei, following Elizabeth St. Pierre, describes post-qualitative inquiry in terms of direct groundings in the theoretical and philosophical literature, that is, without a methodological intermediary. Post-qualitative inquiry has been described in terms of thinking with theory, to encounter different ways that theory-based concepts can produce thought, and that happens in the middle of things. Directly implicated are new empirical and new ethical responsibilities, most often associated with new materialist and post-humanist thinking. Hela Lotz-Sisika and Lee Temper and colleagues have described transgressive inquiry as critical inquiry that constructively disrupts and challenges those aspects of educational inquiry that have become formulaic and normalized, and that are ripe for challenge and for substantive transformations if we actually expect social and environmental change to occur. Environmental education research has become quite naturally, I think, a prime candidate for such work. Have you read the literature lately? Within the SI, within this special issue, readers will be challenged to explore how the authors have variously conceptualized and engaged post-qualitative inquiry as a genre with its certain characteristics. How researchers have creatively operationalized their work in many different ways, conceptually, empirically, and ethically, and as grounded in often in new materialist and post-humanist thinking. So a major tendency or focus for post-qualitative oriented researchers is to create conditions for realist engagements, that is, engagements that Elizabeth Gross describes in terms of an immanent philosophy of presence that implicates realist accounts with affective relations, aesthetics, and many other concepts such as rhizomes, diffraction, affect, refrain, cartography, and so on. And so throughout this special issue, readers are invited to explore the workings of what Gross calls an immanent philosophy of presence, which manifests as agential realism after Karen Barad. I saw a recent paper of hers recently in 2021. I hadn't seen papers from her for a long time, but it's well worth looking up. Accounts of such entries in this SI tend toward realist rather than interpretive accounts that describe how various authors operationalize their inquiries in many different ways of being fully present in their accounts. Mirka Korl, as an editor of Reconceptualizing Educational Research Methodology, exposes the myth of the modernist dream of clean, objective, representational data as an illusion, despite the resistance and reticence to change old habits exhibited by granting councils in a number of universities within a climate where truth is increasingly contested, political, and outdated. I see this picture as in the problem that has much been written about standard methods of qualitative inquiry that raises questions about researcher representation. The developing consensus and movement toward agential realist-based inquiry occurs precisely because the ability of language to represent reality in the process of language production and meaning is severely limited. Many like McClure and St. Pierre have talked about this for over almost 2 decades now. Language is too often unconsciously reformed in the process of interpreting and recreating accounts and stories constructed by the researcher from, for example, visual or interview data. The story, for it is in fact a story, may then influence the meanings that I make because it is shaped unobtrusively by the teller. Annie Dillard captures this problem with a bit of humor in an excerpt from her book Pilgrim at Tinker Creek that I at one time read to all my classes. Peter knows this. I see what I expect. I once spent a full 3 minutes looking at a bullfrog that was so unexpectedly large I couldn't see it even though a dozen enthusiastic campers were shouting directions. Finally, I asked, "What color am I looking for?" And a fellow said, "Green." When I at last picked out the frog, I saw what painters are up against. The thing wasn't green at all, but the color of wet hickory bark. If seeing is very much a process that we engage based on many things, such as experience, readings, or unconscious influences, then how can we, as post-qualitative inquirers, create conditions to make things visible while noticing phenomena out there that are making sense in here, in readers' and viewers' minds? Many post-qualitative perspectives, exemplified by those that you will read in this SI and an increasing number of journals, tend toward engaging relationally, that is, with research and participants, with interactive perceptions and meanings. In the presentations that follow, you will get a sampling of several different ways that this kind of inquiry manifests within a post-qualitative theory or frame, because the researcher's focus is on creating and enabling realist accounts and performances. And so that's just a short excerpt from what I believe is the value in post-qualitative inquiry. And given the number of papers there are these days, it seems to be, I think, a good switch in direction from the kind of research we were doing before. So many journals are, I think, more abundant, and I think very few people read them, and I hope environmental education will be different. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul, for a fabulous introduction. And now I'd like to hand over to you to manage session 1.
Who, me?
Is that you?
Yeah, I am. All right. So we begin with Anne Paulina and Sandra Woltorton. I believe both of those folks are here.
Yes, Sandra is here, but I don't think Anne is in at this stage.
Okay.
And Katrina is trying to join. Mindy is an apology.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you can see their names there, and I guess I will just say that just as a brief introduction to what I think they'll talk about. As I see it, the authors refer to this paper as a conceptual paper and work within relational, post-qualitative, and decolonial paradigms for environmental education and for lives grounded within frames of ancient wisdom. Imagining collaborative futures using field philosophy for a learning experience, they weave poetry and reflective narratives of connection as historical and current relationships with country, exploring knowledge pathways, connecting Indigenous people, place, and time. And they create openings for regenerative futures embedded in environmental changes with demands for climate care. So take it away, Anne, or Sandra, I guess it would be.
Mabubayan, Jaidai Buru. And in my language, which is Nigana, I said, good evening and welcome to country. We want to introduce the paper, Regeneration Time. In this conceptual paper, we work with a relational, post-qualitative, decolonial paradigm for environmental education and life, with ancient wisdom at its heart. We inquire into regenerative cultures where people recognize their extended participation and can co-create possibilities for a thriving and collaborative futures. Using field philosophy, we take Gajin Bidi or learning journey to interweave poetry and reflective narratives with wisdom of 3 Aboriginal languages, Noongar from the Southwest, Nigana, one of the 8 Marwara nations, and Ngaju of the Great Western Woodlands. Our intention is to connect, reconnect, heal, and recreate linkages and celebrated since the beginning of time. We refer to our multi-species family as kin rather than he, she, it, which grounds each relationship within a universally inclusive environment. Through our learning journey, we celebrate values and ethics of care and creativity, narrative, lived experiences, the collective, and justice and ways of responding to sentinel, animate places. We particularly pay attention to notions of non-linear time. We see time in a circle, and our young leaders are taking this ancient wisdom and making modern stories to share how we combine collective wisdom for planetary well-being. And we also look at how, from Edwin Lee Mulligan, how we are dreaming country. Thank you.
Like an elder said, about country, when country calling to you, they come through dreams. And people have been dreaming for country from way back. It's about the bird's eye view. In my father's language, you call them meaning in a dream that already had been seen many times before. I've been perceived that particular dream. I just had to explain that story through my experience. So this is what I wrote down. Flying through the clear blue sky and feeling free as much as a bird could ever be. I was overwhelmed with the relaxation over a familiar dotted landscape that was before me, spotted with splendid colors. It was so rich and breathtaking. I didn't realize that I was a large bird until looking over my shoulders. I had dark brown feathers. I called out through the silent air, and as I gazed into the distance, noticing the whole scenery that was somehow previously painted by myself. It was beautiful, only a place that which we knew very well. There, just above the surface of the water, I could see a barramundi was swimming in motion. It was going westward towards that setting sun, moving gracefully on its own. And at that point, I knew what it meant to me. With that knowledge and overflowing of river wisdom that I had, that somehow I knew, definitely, that there's a connection and a bond between us with the earth, water, and sky, that they are as much as part of us as we are to each other.
Najununilawa Malika, Nyayoyim Mado Aramanin. My name is Malika, and I am a woman who belongs to the Fitzroy River. This is a river where my mother's people grew up, the Nyigana people. One thing I've learnt from leaving my country is that there seems to be a misunderstanding in regards to Aboriginal law. Some people call it folklore, other people call it Dreamtime stories. But what these are really doing is communicating to the next generation the science, law, and values of our people. Up in the hill country, there's a story of Dungaba, which actually represents the fact that there is gas underneath the earth. Over towards Yarra country, there's a story of a one-eyed snake who was actually mutated by uranium. These stories have so much more value to our people than to be classified as folklore. And I really wish that more people understood that there is an error in translation. In first law, everybody is given a jatting. A jatting is a totem, which teaches you to care about things beyond what is simply human. My jatting is the crocodile. So I have a relationship with them, I have respect for them, and I have a duty of care to protect them. Different people are given different animals or plants. This deep and harmonious relationship shows that there's got to be a balance in society, a removal of the hierarchy, and it teaches you as a young person that you are equal to and share respect with a non-human being. It creates accountability, compassion, responsibility, and it is a lifelong project.
Jaida Boro Nigina, welcome to Nigina country. Ngajanu Nilawala and Polina, Ngayo Imadawara Manin, Ngayo Mandajara Nigina, Nigina Nganga. And what I'm saying is, welcome to Nigina country. My name is Anne Polina, and in my language, I said that I am a woman who belongs to the Fitzroy River, the Muddawara. So from a property rights perspective, the river owns me, and I am duty bound to protect the river for the rest of its life. One of the words that we have in our language is a word called Bugaragara. Now, Bugaragara means the past, the present, and the future, fused into this moment in time in which we as human beings need to be able to respond and react in the protection of country. So Bugaragara is a very, very important word, and it places us as being traditional owners, Indigenous people who have been here from the beginning of time. And so we have a due diligence to learn from the old stories, to take those stories as first law stories, and to be able to understand that those stories teach us about values, about ethics, about code of conduct, about how to live in a civil society. One of the things that we say as Indigenous people is that we come from a world of we, not me. And so it's very, very important when we're looking at developing strategies to look at the collective well-being of not just Indigenous people, but our fellow Australians and indeed our global citizens. It is time for Australia and the world to recognise that we are the oldest living culture in the world, that we hold ancient wisdom and stories that we really need to be bringing into looking at how we deal with complexity. So it's time for all of us to wake up, to feel the country, to hear country, and to know that we must co-design the strategies going forward in regards to climate change. These are really critical in terms of the planetary health, but also the health of our nation. And what we're saying is that the knowledge, the wisdom, the love, the ethics of care that are coming as a gift from Indigenous people is a gift that is showing that together we must walk hand in hand if we are going to right-size the planet and bring all of us into a world that can stop climate change from turning into climate chaos.
Thank you. So now over to Katrina.
Kaya, I'm on Noongar country at the moment, and I'm reading a section of poetry from the Great Western Woodland where I work with young Indigenous people. Kids on country, living on country, waiting time. Two of these poems are full in the article. There is this, waiting time, listening to place, the wind's breath, the whispering trees, the plants in flower, the country, the calling, the rhythm, the carpet python as it reveals itself on the road, and we stop to watch kin whispering a story to the senior woman, creating bonds without ink and paper, the dingo that rests upon your back as the stars look down in the dark of night, or trots along beside your four-wheel drive as you cross country, listening. It is the waiting time. the rhythm that calls, shaping the journey, that shares place, and with it story of bobtail that wanders across the road, sharing the story of the flower and the change of seasons. That is what connects us. It is clouds, the smell as rain hits the red earth, the shimmer in the woodland. It is not linear. This time, as place reveals itself and stories unfold, it is country talking.
Thanks, Katrina. I'm going to now read a story about children on country responding to Derbil Yerrigan. For over a year, I walked with a small group of preschool-aged children to explore and experiment with different ways that children might walk with, learn with, and become with Derbil Yerrigan. The Noongar name Derbil Yerrigan describes the mixing of salt and fresh waters as the tidal ebb and flow, the breathing of the estuary that makes up this culturally, environmentally, and historically significant river in Wajak Noongar Buja. During our walks, we learn how to pay attention to Derbil Yerrigan's invitations, and as a result, new, imperfect, and non-innocent relations were made between river, children, plants, and animals. One of these relations included Jinark, Silver Gull, who invites us to think with colonial past-present histories. Quar, quar, quar. It's Camberong, the season of birth and a warm change in weather and longer dry periods. Looking up and around the blue sky, Margaret spots Jinark and excitedly shouts, "Look, they are here. 1, 2, here comes Jinark." Gliding with wind, circling above our heads, they land close to us on Derbil Yerrigan's sandy shoreline. Stopping and then crouching low, Margaret stretches her hand out slowly towards Jinark. They hop towards her, and she remains still. Then, leaning forward, Margaret reaches her hand further with palm facing upwards. Jinark is watching Margaret. Quar, they call, and take off, circling in the sky before flying away.
Thank you, Mindy. In this paper, we set out to answer several questions. The first one being how we extend our sense of society to include the agencies of non-human beings and places. In answer to this question, we learn to recognise ourselves within our local ecological family, as kin, as family members, as integral to shared country and part of collective ancestries. We are all related. We learn to pay close attention to hear and see places and recognise the messages of country. Once we adjust our mindsets, people, place stories are recognisable in plain sight and in everyday places. This also applies in built-up places like cities. Learning on country in cycles of time, waiting time means we need to make time, to be patient. We need to see with our ears and listen with our eyes, to observe what secrets are revealed. We become observational and caring, and we wait for the signs. We learn from Indigenous people to strengthen our empathy of care and value all life, such as responding to an invitation issued by a mallee fowl while crossing the road, an invitation to her nest in front of our busload of children. This is very doable. When we, all of us, sing out to country or river, we evoke a response. On behalf of our writing team, thank you very much.
Well, the next, I'm blown away by that performance. Paulina Ratio, Rika Hoti Turi Tammy, and Henrika Yilriscu, Multiple Worlds and Strange Objects, Environmental Education Research as an Additive Practice. These authors engage ideas in thinking with strange objects. They discuss how they proceed with assemblage thinking and apply this to their thinking about environmental problems, conceptualized differently. Locating their approaches as post-qualitative, they ask what becomes of inquiry when the taken for granted human-centric research procedures no longer hold, or when they transgress disciplinary boundaries, or when they become immersed in strange encounters with multi-species assemblages and multiple temporalities that require new thinking and perhaps the capability and sensibility to respond to the immediate environment with realist stories, recordings of soundscapes, multisensory experiences, and or poetry that expose the incompleteness of existing theories and research practices.
Hello, everyone. I'm Paula Naravia. I'm going to be talking about the article we wrote for this special issue about strange objects. So it was written together with Rika Hohti, Tuura Tammi, and Henrika Ylirisku. And I'm just going to talk through it. All the references and all the juicy bits are in the article. I hope you can hear me. So yeah, please refer to the article for the bigger picture. So contemporary scholars of environmental education and research of sustainability education are increasingly connected by the problems that we study and that the world proposes to us, rather than particular methods or approaches. It's not like we're qualitative inquiries or we're this and that approach. It's rather, this is the shared problem that we approach from various viewpoints. So in the paper that we wrote, we align with the idea that research of environmental and sustainability education is not so much or not only about facing a task of formulating new theories and proposing new methodologies. Thank you for participating. But it's a task of also understanding and resituating our existing research practices. So not so much as like realizing that there's a problem and coming up with something completely new to solve it, but rather revisiting the things that we've sort of always done as researchers and understanding them in new ways. So the strange object or the resisting object that we write about is something that's not easily understood with existing approaches. It is something that resists traditional discipline boundaries, and it's something that requires scholars to both collaborate in their thinking as well as to change the definitions and practices of their disciplines and fields. She goes. So the paper includes 3 different examples from working with strange objects, 3 methodological stories, if you will, and 3 peeks into the research processes and practices that we engage in with Tuura and Rika and Henrika. Each of the 3 stories is a little bit different, but they're all connected by what we identify as a post-qualitative research orientation. And we describe this as an additive one at the end of the paper, following Bruno Latour. So in the first story, Rika and Tuura describe and talk about their work in an educational greenhouse. And they keep resituating their research practices that lean on ethnography. They describe how and where their own animal turn took place, how their ethnographical practices began to accommodate the animal turn and live out the animal turn that was taking place and is taking place in the human and social sciences. So for them, it was less a conscious choice of like, let's embrace the animal turn and go along with it. And it was more about a situation that demanded it, that gave rise to the kind of modification of their thinking and practices that was required in that situation, which was that they entered a fieldwork school that had a huge greenhouse zoo in the middle of it, complete with countless small animals. So the mere existence of animals in a school within the normative and normalized frames of schools and schooling that are pretty universal that we can all recognize. So just the existence of animals within these frames was instantly a strange thing. It would be for, I would argue, most. So it began to raise questions and also to sustain questioning rather than hurrying to find any answers. So they followed Vincent Despret, who talks about polite visiting. And as part of this polite visiting, Vincent Despret advocates for the possibilities of transformation in research. And she doesn't mean transformation of the research participants, but researchers, saying that those you went to visit are never quite who or what you expected, and you yourself are not quite what you thought either. And I quote Rika and Dure from our article, we listen to stories, and each story seemed to change and mutate something in the interactive fashion we described above. We started a field note practice of hanging with the events and stories and writing new ones, compiling an archive of stories that we named the compost. End quote. The strangeness of the educational zoo was even more evident after Rika and Dura visited other schools. It had to do with temporality. Whereas other schools operated with one singular institutional time, it seemed, the greenhouse school opened up a temporal multiplicity, challenging the institutional frames, at least within the walls of the greenhouse. And in this way of doing research, instead of having a clear and predetermined object of research beforehand, and knowing this beforehand, this approach by Rika and Dure allowed all kinds of things to be picked up along the way, all kinds of stories, partial ones, speculative ones, without knowing how they will start to work with each other. So putting all of these stories into their story compost that they describe. And without knowing what kind of an object would be formed during the process. Rika and Dure quote Kaisa Kortekallio in concluding that as much as the researcher is performing inquiry, they're also played out by it. So these are among the insights that help to view the researcher's body as something through which material semiotic currents pass and diffract. Storytelling presented Rika and Dure a possibility of joining something, an ongoing stream of stories and bodies in co-production. The second story is by me, and it's about a girl and a horse. It began as a conventional inquiry, but began to resist the existing framings and ways of working that I had, or that the society or our culture in the North of Finland, the horse culture, the framings that that culture had. And my response to this resistance was to give space to it, give space to the strangeness and resistance by adding on new modes of inquiry, as we went along with the research project with the girl and the horse. This means that I would keep changing my plans and adding new elements in the research design, new materials, new locations, new activities, new everything, anything. The girl, Katie, was not a strange object, nor was her relationship with the horse a strange object in the way that we talk about them. The strange object in my story is the methodological construct and the entire research design, or the process of research. I describe in my story how I encountered strange moments or resistance when I was trying to accommodate Katie's preferred way of relating to a horse. And in those moments when facing resistance, how I kept on responding by adding elements to the inquiry. So I was not trying to further focus, I was trying to then further open up more and more and different to make space for the strangeness. I did not begin with a single strange object, but I was creating one as the research process unfolded. And I accommodated more and more paths in order to create a space for Katie, the girl, and Hilima, the horse, to exist in a way that seemed to be required. I understand research as an unfolding process, and the methodological construct I understand as a co-produced research space, which is a strange object that in itself is the object of research. The process and the co-construction of the research space is kind of the object of the whole thing. It's like a laboratory in a way. The third story is by Henrika, and it's about how to think with the forest. Henrika describes how her research concepts, those that are critically addressing human centrism, followed her into the forest on her spare time when she was not a researcher, but an athlete engaged in orienteering, running and finding her way in the woods for a sport. The concepts would follow nevertheless and make her question her movements and the practices of orienteering in the woods. It did not take long before the forest began to participate in Henrika's research and to teach Henrika to think, as she writes. Much in line with the first and the second story, research practices start to unfold from the process itself and cannot be known in advance. So the idea of methods as processes of gathering data and then reporting on what you find turns to being in the world that is open to experimentation. Henrika writes, and quoting Stephanie Springier and Sarah Truman. Relying on human language appeared limited for Henrika in the woods, and attempts to think beyond human meaning making seemed clumsy for her. The forest kept on resisting human words, and the forest remained strange, a strange object. Using her sport, orienteering, as a propositional catalyst, also from Springier and Truman, Henrika engaged in a process with the forest, in which the forest was reorienting and reteaching her to experience its multiplicity in a different way. And this process lasted for not only 2 or 3 runs, or even 1 season, but several years. So more about the 3 stories in the juicy details and like all details in general, go and read the article. I'm going to sum up somehow what this is all about with regard to environmental and sustainability education research. The 3 examples all share an attitude that we recognize as typical to most post-qualitative inquiry. It's what Bruno Latour would call an additive empiricist take. Additive empiricism. This is when the phenomenon under study is approached by actively engaging with it, not observing, not analyzing with some predetermined means, but actively engaging with it, poking and probing and responding to it and seeing what happens. Adding, complicating, slowing down and hesitating in order to explore and to multiply the possible versions that could exist in any given social, historical, cultural, political, whatever situation. So when talking about strangeness, it's important to realize that objects are not, of course, they're not inherently strange by essence, but that they become produced as strange by processes, different processes, which then call our attention. So in a way, the sense of strangeness for us, for a researcher, is a signal that there's something in the world that could be known differently than it currently is. Post-qualitative approaches can, but they don't automatically, highlight the role of co-production in research. When they do, however, the inquiries have potential to address the pitfalls that have often been located to exist in any post-paradigm or new materialist research approaches, namely the danger of glossing over social injustices and inequalities between humans when advocating a focus on the non-human and the material. So we're thinking that whenever or when first of all approaches are address or highlight co-production in research, this pitfall of glossing over injustices could be avoided or addressed. And furthermore, to move beyond mere proliferation of different paths that we also often see in post-qual research, is that we end up producing just more and more alternatives without putting our foot down as to what would be the more desirable version. We just like produce more and more, like you could think about it in this way and this way and this way. So to move beyond that, the strange objects portrayed in this paper all show that the created research spaces in themselves can be understood as concrete testimony of the possibilities and limitations of what can be done, what is possible now, with what conditions, and what might be possible for future societies and space, what would then require for future spaces and frames of action. So the research space in itself is a testimony that something can be done or thought of differently. Yes, I think this was my talk, with the chickens being very confused hearing me talk English. They recognize my voice and apparently the language as well, because they usually are very friendly and all over me, but now they don't. They hear me talk in English and they find it strange. And this was a genuine surprise to me. I was hoping to be surrounded by chickens, but they find the language a strange choice. Thanks, everyone.
The third presentation that I'm pleased to introduce is one by Robin Bellingham. And it's entitled A Diffractive and Decolonizing Reading Methodology for Educational Research. Now, as I see it, Robin's work exemplifies a post-qualitative destabilizing of long-held assumptions within educational research by outlining two diffractive reading experiences, drawing from decolonial theory and Karen Brad's work on diffraction theory. The paper is grounded in alternative to onto-epistemological assumptions associated with colonial modernity. And by reading these prior diffractive experiences through one another, Robin identifies methods for learning from difference that open up larger questions about the existing theory praxis that may act to perpetuate colonial capitalist systems of modernity. I enjoyed this paper. It's a complex paper and well worth the time that you'd spend looking at it. Robin.
Hello, I'm Robin Bellingham. I'm from Deakin University. This short presentation is called Considering Patterns of Violence in Sustainability Curriculum and Discourse. In this short presentation, I draw on some of the methodological ideas in my article in the recent AJEE special issue, in which I discuss some experiments in using a diffractive and decolonizing reading methodology. So in this presentation, I won't cover this methodology. If you'd like, perhaps you could seek out the AJEE article if you'd like to know more about the methodology. Instead, I'll continue to think diffractively, with a set of ideas that both intrigue and haunt me, which are ideas around coloniality, science, curriculum and pedagogy, and violence. And I pay attention to some thought and ontology patterns, perhaps some violent patterns across decolonial theory, policy, and Australian curriculum that are entangled with the use of the term sustainability. Sustainability is a ubiquitous word in the lexicon for discussing responses to ecological crisis. My intention is to briefly raise questions about patterns of violence across sustainability policy, discourse, and curriculum. And my provocations to listeners are these questions. What is the value of the term sustainability? How does it support or obstruct our capacity to address the damages of colonial modernity? Does sustainability need to be reimagined? Can it be? Or is the term too bound and entangled in colonial ordering to escape? Academic and artist Denise Ferreira da Silva conceptualizes the violence of modern thought. She argues that modern thought is based on the constructs separability, determinacy, and sequentiality, and that it is these that create conditions of violence that emerge in modernity. Separability and determinacy are the assumptions that allow modernity to conceive of the social as pertaining to humans and distinct from nature and as a whole in itself, but also made up of further properly separable and determinable components, for example, gender, race, sexuality, nationality, and ethnicity. Sequentiality rests on the notion that events occur in a linear, one-directional series. So sequentiality also rests on separability and determinacy, because without the identification of things separate from one another, it would not be possible to determine sequences. Sequentiality, determinacy, and separability underlie all of our traditional science. For example, the commonplace insight of Newtonian causal relations, which is the belief that the effect of an action of one entity on another can be determined, and that this occurs in a linear sequence in forward-moving time. So according to Ferreira da Silva, these constructs naturalise opposition and alienation because separability, determinacy, and sequentiality must mean that difference is an unresolvable estrangement. This notion underlies Darwinian evolution as it is commonly understood. The common wisdom is that natural selection operates as a forceful struggle for existence and competition for resources between innately differentiated groups, resulting over time in further differentiation in hierarchies of those who are more or less successful. This thinking underlies colonialism and capitalism, and it has gone relatively unquestioned as a principle of nature in modernity. separability, indeterminacy, and sequentiality then naturalize and justify struggle, conflict, hierarchy, and violence between groups in our minds and our habits of living and relating. This then makes it possible to accept exploitation of other entities as resources and capture, enslavement, experimentation, manipulation, torture, burning, fracking, ripping, drilling, mining, polluting as forms and byproducts of these normalized relations. The assumptions of separability, determinacy, and sequentiality are evident in the notion of sustainability. In 1987, a WCED report explicitly shackled sustainability and development together. So sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present generations without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. This coupling sustainable development has taken a firm hold as a definition of sustainability itself. The definition assumes separate nature as resources and assets for human use, and the necessity of ongoing sequential accumulation and progress for humanity. It positions technological solutions and economic growth as the ingredients of sustainability. So solutions typically involve measurement and quantification of environmental impacts, development of regulatory apparatuses, and use of market mechanisms to encourage modernizations of technologies with the goal to improve efficiency. So that is to use fewer resources but increase production. And in this framing, sustainability is tied to a particular form of hope, which is a hope premised on the assumption of a future in which humans as individuated species and as individuated selves can continue to accumulate wealth and resources. All of this suggests that a function of the term sustainability in public policy has historically been to divert public attention from the realistic consequences of political and economic systems and to help set an agenda which is widely regarded to be appropriate and necessary of an optimistic discourse about the future of humanity. This is largely a business as usual discourse, that is a discourse of sustained development. As Stein argues, from a decolonial perspective, the very idea of sustainability is suspect, and it therefore becomes necessary to ask, what are we trying to sustain and why? And in Australia, we might also ask how our particular understanding of sustainability also co-emerges in entanglement with the heritage of the particular strain of ruthless colonialism that Deborah Bird-Rose comments on. Australian settler ontology involved a particular future-facing orientation and individualised ambition that took brutality for granted. This thinking is not grounded in logic, and it's highly problematic in many Indigenous knowledges. For example, for the Indigenous Action Group, this thinking is embedded in an apocalyptic logic, a compulsion with a self-fulfilling prophecy of extermination, where everything is subject to the rhythm of this forward march of progress. The end is not a future event, but it's a constant inherent part of the march, because progress, which is the accumulation of knowledge, wealth, and resources, dictates that everything around us is drawn with us into daily participation in its own demise. So ingrained are our understanding of time as linear and our aspiration of continued accumulation and longevity, it seems hard to imagine a concept of sustainability from which these are disentangled. And political and economic powers are disinclined to assist in this disentanglement. So if science is inseparably entangled with violence, is sustainability also inseparably entangled with violence Is it possible to imagine it in a different way? Separability, determinacy, and sequentiality also underlie the modern claim that knowledge, including knowledge of environmental crisis, can be produced with certainty by a mathematical and empirical demonstration, which establishes causes and effects. And this helps to reduce responses to environmental crises such as climate change as the finding and applying of solutions. Well, what's wrong with solutions? Read through Ferreira da Silva's Violence of Modern Thought. Our over-reliance on solutions thinking lends momentum to the pattern of a human nature divide and to the notion of humans, and especially the human capacity for science, as possessing the capacity to control and master nature. Then also, and especially in the context of complex things like ecological crisis, solutions thinking tends to be dependent on extreme kinds of reductionism, leading to misleading kinds of knowledge and assisting to preserve the invisibility of the relations between forms of power and emergent damage. Education, research, and communication about climate change are constructed primarily as matters of establishing the sources of authoritative knowledge, disseminating information from these sources about what is certain and predictable about it, and using this information to process and ascertain solutions to master it. They are not seen as matters of conducting in relations and politics radically differently. So solutions thinking, read through Ferreira da Silva, helps to justify and obscure its inherent violence. Situated human decision-making is replaced with an impersonal, unquestionable, uncontrollable, and decontextualized logic. Because the identification, deployment, and impact measurement of solutions doesn't require any encounters or relationships, power relations and histories, trauma, damage, bodies, experiences, narratives all disappear. So I had in the past also observed these patterns in the Australian sustainability cross-curriculum priority. And I was interested in what these patterns look like in the new curriculum version 9. So briefly, I tended to wear the human nature binary, the primacy of development and progress via technology, science and solutions thinking, the dysfunctional individualistic future-focused orientation, and the sanctioned ignorance of institutional power and past and ongoing trauma are disrupted and where they are reinforced in this new version. So as I say very briefly, a disturbance. There are some shifting views around separability and determinacy in relation to the human nature binary evident in the curriculum revisions. There's an emphasis on interdependence and connections as central organising ideas. So, for example, in the statement that all life forms, including human life, are connected through Earth systems on which they depend for their well-being and survival. And a fairly significant disturbance is that version 9 of the curriculum alludes to the role of economic and political power in making change. For example, sustainable futures are achieved through informed individual, community, business, and political action. And it's interesting to note that these mentions of economic and political power were not present in the previous version or in the revisions consultation document that was brought out last year. So I see this disturbance as a nice win for the consultation process. On the other hand, the curriculum continues to define sustainability in terms of sustainable development. That is, sustainable patterns of living meet the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. So, and not surprisingly, I think the new version provides a somewhat inconsistent view of what learning in action for sustainability should entail. In places, it continues to reinforce the idea that responsibility and action towards sustainability matters for individuals and communities to negotiate for themselves. While institutional and political power make appearances, there is ambiguity as to what these references are supposed to signal. There's an absence of an imperative to address the role of the political economy in historical and present planetary violence and its ongoing consequences. What seems more important is that individuals in schools and communities should now understand their own responsibility to the earth to support their own future. And of course, nowhere in the sustainability cross-curriculum priority is it suggested that issues of unsustainability might have a direct relationship to the ongoing intensification of colonial capitalism. So, returning to my provocations, what is the value of the term sustainability? Does it, on balance, support or obstruct our capacity to address the damages of colonial modernity? Can sustainability be generatively reimagined, or is the term too bound up in colonial ordering to free itself?
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much to our three excellent presentations. Paul, shall I give some direction as we move into discussion?
Please do.
So what we would like to do now is, of course, we acknowledge that we haven't had question time, but we would like to move you into breakout rooms where you have the opportunity to discuss the presentations with some colleagues in a meaningful, small way. We would also like to invite you to consider reflecting your presentation, your discussion in a Jamboard. So if you haven't used the Jamboard before, it's a Google program, and we have one set up here. You could take on a discussion here related to the number of the breakout room that you go into. I think there'll be 5 breakout rooms today. I've set up 6 pages. Anyway, pick a page. And then if you would like to add a sticky note, you could add something here and hit save, and then it will pop up on the screen, and you might choose to order or organize your thoughts that way. So the link is in the chat. If you would like to use the Jamboard, that would be wonderful. We would also like one person to report back to the group. So we'll put you in breakout rooms now, probably for about 20 minutes. And then we'll invite you back in, and we'll do a quite quick sharing as we look at your Jamboards that may reflect your conversation or not if it doesn't feel right for you. But we will have an oral representation of your conversation. Does that seem like an okay set of instructions or suggestions? Great, thanks, Annette. All right, 5 breakout rooms. I hope that you accept the invitation that comes your way. I'm going to create them automatically and open all rooms. Okay, wonderful. Thank you for coming back. Great to see you. Could we proceed with a feedback session from each of the groups? Perhaps we could just go in order this time. So group 1 would be great to start with you. So that was Alistair, Davika, Jane, Russell and Sandra.
We forgot to name somebody, but I think Russell might do a wonderful job. Would you like to talk about that conversation, Russell?
Maybe unmute yourself, Russell.
I didn't realize I was muted. I just tried to hand over the microphone to you, Sandra.
Oh, did you?
I was wondering. No, look, I'll because I typed these sticky notes, I'll talk. We talked about some of the contradictions inherent in this sort of need for solutions. On the other hand, the need to turn our backs on a lot of the sort of thinking that Robin pointed out is associated with solution seeking, and just how you balance those, and in particular how you balance those in a sort of social agenda, like with schools. We talked about how impermeable government and systems are to these ideas who are intent on business as usual, I suppose, or at least have structures that really mitigate against challenge of these, and for whom the structures of power are invisible. It's just taken for granted. So that banality of evil was a Hannah Arendt reference right at the end of our conversation about how even if we can affect change in perspective of individuals, that in fact systems themselves are set up to be surprisingly impermeable and hard to change. I don't know. I think there are a few other points. Are there other points others would like to?
We have to be quite quick. Go, Sandra.
Oh, I was just going to say, so seeing those systems as impervious is one thing, and there is an impermeability about those too. Like perhaps those systems are actually living, you know, alive and able to be influenced in the same way that other systems are. That's all.
Thank you, Sandra. Wonderful.
Thanks, Russell.
We go to the second group, please. So the second group was David, Ephrat, Marianne, Paul, Scott, and Sharon.
We didn't assign anyone to speak on our behalf. We got carried away and didn't do that. Oh, David, do you want to nominate yourself to talk for us?
I'm happy to say a little bit kind of where the discussion started with really thinking through Denise Ferreira de Silva's work on difference without separability, and sort of the significance that work comes from the radical Black tradition of thought that is both critical and abolitionist in orientation, but also highly speculative in terms of committed to inventing alternative forms of life and sociality that are attuned to difference and the value of difference, kind of even at the level of nature and what we think of as ecology and more than human relationality and pluralism. And kind of thinking from there to sustainability as a concept that has its roots in systems theories that come out of basically a colonial capitalistic white mode of thought that comes out of economic theory, basically invented to provide the cognitive tools necessary to drive economic growth at the expense of life. And so there was this kind of idea that we can't, it's in some ways futile to try to replace sustainability with a new or different concept, because the underlying thinking underneath the concept of sustainability is basically just designed and engineered to perpetuate white supremacy. And that we actually need to look to practices such as those in indigenous life ways, and knowledges that start from difference without separability, start from ecological difference and attunement to more than human relationality and the inseparability of human thought and culture and techniques and sociality from all of the forms of life. And that that doesn't necessarily entail inventing new or better concepts, but actually just listening carefully to practices and concepts that are already with us and are already generously shared as they were in the first presentation.
Thanks, David. That's great. And just noting, David has a contribution in the special issue, and I think some of what you've just been relating then certainly relates to your paper. So encourage everyone to check that out. Thank you. I'm sorry to move us on. I know we could enjoy a very rich conversation here. Could I, however, move us to group 3? So Annette and Noel, Hilary, Kathleen, Paulina, and Robin.
We didn't appoint anybody either. And I've just hurriedly put up those sticky notes based around what we talked about. Because we were fortunate to have both Robin and Paulina in our group, we started out with talking about what their papers were about. And we talked about chickens, yes. So I've got chickens up there. How were the chickens affected, and is that unusual? And we also talked about sustainability being not only part of the colonial discourse, but also the very much the neoliberal. And that the New York Times recently had an article on the neoliberal agenda being dead, but nothing to replace it. So whether that opens up a space, but I think that was also someone pushing their own book rather than it being a serious question for society. We also then moved on to sort of environmental matters and sort of big picture stuff of, does coral destruction on the Great Barrier Reef really matter? And should people who live on floodplains complain about the floods? And how will the higher ambient temperatures in northern Finland at the moment, what will their long-term effect be? So we sort of meandered around a bit without necessarily reaching any endpoint.
Sounds like great meanderings. Thank you very much for that. Let's go to group 4, and I know they're very proud of their Jamboard. So let's hear from Thomas, Chris, Helen, Charlotte, and Anna.
Yeah, I was asked to talk about this. So yeah, we had a number of topics we covered. We covered the identification of persons with rivers, or the ownership of persons by rivers, which triggered some thought in some contribution from the fact in New Zealand, Maori have the saying, "I am the river is me." So it's not so much that the river owns you, but there's an identification there, and feeling the sameness with. In fact, the Wanganui River in New Zealand was given personhood in New Zealand legally, which is of interest perhaps. I was particularly drawn to Robin Bellingham's talk, and I thought indeed solution seeking is perhaps difficult, and I'm teaching currently a class in environmental education, and I think I will probably next year highlight the fact that rather seeking solutions, we are making difference. Acknowledge that's what we do. We make a difference, which is more neutral. It could be negative, it could be positive. Certainly making a difference for what we do, but it may not be a solution. And what's a solution anyway? We talked about assemblages. We talked about these drawings you see here. They are made by an artificial intelligence system called DALL-E. AI drawing system. I use these drawings for my research. I triggered the AI to make drawings of Deleuzian terminology in the style of surrealist line drawings. The one here with the face and the eyes was given back to me by the system when I triggered it with deterritorialization. And it really speaks to me of deterritorialization being a way of getting out of your own territorializations, of your own representations that you carry in your mind about how the world is, and look beyond what it might actually otherwise be. I found the system extraordinary and post-qualitative in a way, because you're using an AI to talk back to you and trigger your thoughts. I'm still not quite sure what I'm making of it. It's quite recent, but quite interesting. We talked about from Thailand how different languages are woven into research, and how in Thailand the pronoun Kai. Oh, do you want to talk to it yourself? I can't. Sorry, Charlotte. Do you want to talk about this yourself? Because I didn't quite.
Yeah, sure.
Make
it's
it
something
work.
that I was reading on LinkedIn.
Charlotte?
Can you hear me?
Anyhow, so yeah, so we draw a chicken, which brought us into the space.
Thanks, Thomas. That's great. Charlotte, would you like to share your thoughts now?
Oh, sorry, I don't know if we all overlapped then. I've read recently about the pronoun ki coming from, I don't know if I've pronounced that right, coming from kin and kind and kindred, and how ki might be used in my research to replace human pronouns. So I was just making the connection there to the first piece of research where, yeah, he, she, they is replaced with kin. So ki was something that was making me think, particularly with the human crocodile assemblage, and that sort of living in harmony, coexisting in a particular place. That was all.
That's great. Thank you. And thank you very much to group 4. Let's move to group 5. And we have Cassandra, Jinda, Sarah, Sayurai, and Yanina.
Well, as you can see, we were bad students and we didn't fill anything in, and we forgot that we were going to have to present at the end. So everyone decided it was me. But really, we had many fabulous conversations that were rather meandering, like a river. But so I was trying to remember what we talked about. So just very briefly, we started speaking about Edwin Lee Mulligan's idea of river wisdom and first law stories, and thinking about sort of within education, working with the complexity within co-design and the assemblages formed. And then we started questioning when we as learners, when did we first think of ourselves as separate from the environment? So when did that happen? And no one came up with an absolute idea, but that sort of led on to Paulina's talk and thinking about the chickens in the school. And then from there, we started thinking about how interesting it was that, that the sound of the chickens, the squawking of the chickens, was actually muted by Zoom as part of the presentation. And so this sense of the privileging of the human was even happening on the Zoom recording. So then we went off on a bunch of tangents speaking about or what was it, was hearing through different modes of hearing, AI technologies, sort of only seeing certain versions of what it is to be human. And so we really had a lovely talk, but clearly I have not written any notes. And then we started just speaking about dust and when, how dust is or isn't human. And there we go. That's everything I can remember.
Well, thanks, Cass. That's fantastic. Thank you very much for those conversations. Perhaps you would join me in thanking our 3 presenters. One of those great Zoom claps. Thank you very much to Anne, Sandra, and the collective. Paulina and Chickens, and Robin, fabulous. We're going to take a short break now. I think 15 minutes is hopefully enough, and we look forward to seeing you back here, let's say at 5:20. So our time is a little out. That's okay. We'll see you then, and thanks very much so far. Okay, so as we start into session 2, I would like to introduce 3 more presentations to you. They are all pre-recorded, and again, we'll proceed from one through to the other and then enjoy our conversation through breakout rooms and then bring that back together. So the first presentation, before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that in our special issue, we were fortunate to have Alice present a poem to AJEE, and it just so beautifully brought in voice and represented 5 Amazon voices, in fact, with a claim for existence. So I'm very pleased that AJEE has published a poem as such, and I would like to indulge this group by perhaps reading it collaboratively. That's going to get tricky over Zoom, so I guess I'll read it, but I'd love it if you'd read it along with me, perhaps in your mind. So, from Alice Medina, 5 Amazon Voices, the claim for existence. At the table in the forest, every sprout from the soil must converse so as to claim the right to spring. Up to the forest's cry. Its hope is hopeless to hush the warning to the living that life is doomed. Many were the gestures summoning for attention from the forest, embodied by male and female fighters for the nature of life, with no gag or torture. In unison, trees rise and claim the roots of unbearable tales, written in pain, and memories. Let us introduce ourselves. I am Marakanduba from the soil, the frame of many homes. I am Parapara, one to nourish air and to promote the existence of all that moves over the land. If you don't change your values, you will have nowhere to tread. The recollections of this place, where only rumours are left about doomed lives unknown to life from the remaining life that is left over. As tall as Kajukana, I also announce my nuts, my eyes as witnesses. I am son of the great Amazon forest, breeding diversity. I am Tatajuba of the forest. Chainsaws will not silence this tree. I embody nature as part of me as it becomes this place. I am the last to speak. Accepted by the jungle as an anaeroba being born, I am here to request the right to live. I am here to speak about what no one can deny. Nature has its rights. We gather to alert while time writes history as a closing movement, that the rights over the life on Earth are vital to claim. Those who lead the planet embrace all nature and be embraced by it, assure its rights and save it for the sake of life. So thank you to Alice for sharing that piece with us. Paul and I both agreed that it really added something to the special issue, and I was really pleased to be able to share it with you today. Apologies for my pronunciation. Okay, the first presentation in session 2 is from Margaret Somerville and Sarah Powell, and I'm pleased to see Margaret and Sarah with us today. Welcome. So they have a pre-recorded presentation for us. It's called Becoming with Fire and Rainforest, Emergent Curriculum and Pedagogies for Planetary Wellbeing. Thank you, and I'll play the recording.
Our presentation today is about Becoming with Fire and Rainforest, Emergent Curriculum and Pedagogies for Planetary Wellbeing. We acknowledge that we are working on Darug lands and Gadigal communities, and this is a picture of the lands where we're working, and we acknowledge their continuing connection to culture and communities and their elders, future, present and future.
In this presentation, we propose the concept of becoming with in relation to the experience of the catastrophic fires in the summer of 2019 and 2020 in Australia, and their implications for research into young children's response to bushfires and their learning about bushfire recovery, which resulted in the development of an arts-based project to explore emergent curriculum and pedagogies for planetary wellbeing. We draw on Deleuze and Guattari's theorising that the self is only a threshold, a door, a becoming between two multiplicities, and spatio-temporal relations as not predicates of the thing, but dimensions of multiplicities of events as encounters, to theorise how becoming with fires enabled the development of emergent curriculum and pedagogies in an early learning centre, which can ultimately contribute to planetary wellbeing.
In the summer season of 2019-2020, Australia experienced a climate emergency in the form of catastrophic fires that burnt an estimated 18.6 million hectares, 186,000 square kilometres of bush, destroyed over 5,900 buildings, including 2,779 homes, and killed at least 34 people directly, with an additional 4,500 dying of smoke inhalation. An estimated 1 billion animals were killed and some endangered species could be driven to extinction.
According to Deleuze and Guattari, the self is only a threshold, a door, a becoming between two multiplicities. If we imagined the position of a fascinated self, it was because the multiplicity toward which it leans, stretching to the breaking point, is the continuation of another multiplicity that works it and strains it from the inside. Each multiplicity is symbiotic. Its becoming ties together animals, plants, microorganisms, mad particles, a whole galaxy.
It was during this time of multiple becomings with fires that the Bushfire Project began, an arts-based project initiated in response to young children's experiences of the fires at an early learning and long day care centre for children from 0 to 5 years of age at the foot of Sydney's Blue Mountains, one of the epicentres of fires. The project began with a single child's experience and developed increasing momentum over time, evolving to create emergent curriculum and pedagogies in relation to young children's responses to bushfires and bushfire recovery.
So the first child to arrive at Jalaringi was Lucas, and he was 3.5 years of age. His mother said that they had to evacuate from the south coast of New South Wales where the fires were raging, and it took them over 12 hours driving through burning bushlands, being stopped repeatedly by the police and having to wait along the road ahead until the road ahead was cleared of flames before progressing to the next safe point.
Lucas asked if he could do a drawing. So Tessa, the director, took him to the drawing table. He sat, picked up the red crayon and began to draw. "It's a fire," he stated, very matter of fact. Tessa asked if he had seen the fires. He nodded, then said he was in the car for a long time and the trees were burning near them. He reached the black crayon and drew again. This was after the fire had gone. When the paintings were done, Tessa and Lucas talked quietly together, just the two of them, about what he had seen and how it felt. "I was a bit scared," he whispered.
And then, of course, all the children were invited to paint. And these are some of the examples. So Robin says about hers, "The black went round and the red is very hot." Kerry says, "The red spots are the fires, but the grey ones are the homes. The long line is the road to the sea." And Rosie said about her picture, "The koala's fur with fire on it. This is the koalas will go to heaven."
The project continued to develop emergent arts-based methodologies in response to the children's multiple becomings with fires and the changing planetary forces to which they were exposed. The evolving arts-based methods included painting, singing, storytelling, craft work, making forest, making storybooks, and planting native gardens. Other examples of becoming with included plant regeneration, injured animals, native shrubs, trees, and Indigenous food plants.
And this was an example of a forest that they planted in the sandpit, and then they actually made a book out of it for the centre. And Margaret took in some charcoal from an actually burnt tree in the area. And the children, you can see there, the children have done some beautiful artworks using that charcoal about the burnt bushfire bush.
Becoming with gum trees, burri babies. This is the 0 to 2 years group. And these are trees that they hung over their site, and a description of the what's in the trees that smelt of eucalypts. Mayura, jarrah and cockatoo friends, possum on the roof, koala returning to the wild.
And here's another example of becoming with water and rocks. And these were the toddler group as well. So you can see one little person there smelling the flowers and also watering the flowers, which was highly popular.
Becoming with possum in a tree. Another creative practice that they did was to make a tree installation, and they created a nest box with a possum in it.
So visual displays of, becoming with through turning the centre into a rainforest. Visual displays of what a rainforest looks like were also shown to the children so that they had an understanding of what they looked like. This way, when the team dived deeper into the project, they can apply what they are learning to places that they visit. And here are some of the things that the children said when they were looking at some of the pictures. Declan said, anaconda. Scarlett says, fly, and she did the arm actions, pointing to the butterfly image. Grace said, butterfly, blue and black. Christian said, toucan. I see toucans at my zoo. Declan said, tiger, rah. And Christian said, I have a panther at my house, black and white. And Nathan said, rah.
So then we moved on to becoming with animals. And Christian became with water and said, rainforest is green. Toucan is having a bath. Declan said, armadillo has long tail. Christian, that's so cute, talking about a beer cat. Nathan said, scary, about a tiger. And Declan said, I like monkeys. Christian, piranhas, tickle. Nathan, snap, 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 crocodile. Scarlett, rah, turtle, when she saw the water.
After this, the children came together to discuss rainforests and also why trees are so important. And these are some of the things, again, that the children said. Kalaine said that trees, they can grow seeds. Logan said they can breathe. Safia, they make us breathe. Lucy said they help us sing. Ryder said they make shade. Daniel, no trees, no breathing. Hugh, monkeys in the trees. Hayley said, we need trees to grow earth. Camilla said leaves. Haran said they have leaves. Rayon, tigers in trees. Lewis said, we have hearts too. Ryder said they have trees. Lewis says, has rain. Daniel said that trees were there to block the rain. And Natalia also said they have hearts. And Lewis, we have hearts too.
So our conclusion is that children's experience, perception and experience of events come into being, are given shape as they step into a process of becoming with bushfire or becoming with rainforest, and between the two. Each relies on the other to be reached, but never complete, in a constant state of becoming. These becomings are never finished, but offer continuous opportunities for children to explore and respond to the well-being of the planet.
And just to finish off, we just wanted to acknowledge the contribution of all the educators who we worked with. Rebecca in the babies room and Monique in the toddlers room and Rashmi in the preschoolers room, as well as Carol, who was a casual assistant throughout the process. We wanted to acknowledge their work in creating the emergent curriculum and pedagogies in collaboration with the children in each of their rooms, and for their documentation of the children's responses through their artworks, creative installations, and regeneration activities.
Wonderful. Thank you very much to Margaret and Sarah. We'll move on to our second presentation. This presentation is by Cassandra Tytler, and it's called We Found a Body, the intra-body of human, technology, narrative, and environment as post-qualitative inquiry.
Hi, everyone. My name's Cassandra Tytler. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm speaking from the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia. I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to all First Nations peoples here today. I'll just share my screen. Okay, so with this presentation, I'd like to speak about the value of using creative outputs in post-qualitative inquiry. I'll refer to one of my own creative works, We Found a Body, as an example, as well as make references to the ideas and philosophies that I wrote about for the AJEE special issue, namely a post-humanist queer reading of performativity through Barat, alongside an effect-focused study of world-making harnessed by Masumi. My interest with my own project is how digital art practice that maps participants across a physical site can produce new modes of belonging within time and space, and where extended ways of being human within the environment are at play. There is the potential for this mode of practice to open new future methods within post-qualitative inquiry within an environmental education context. So, following a post-qualitative inquiry that also takes its positioning through a critical post-humanist and new materialist lens, my interest in research is to blur the hierarchies between the human and the more than human, so that the human subject is not central to the existence of that which is alongside it. Within academic inquiry, I recognise that the individual subject researcher is not objective and cannot help bringing their own lived positioning and experience into the lens of inquiry. Qualitative inquiry influenced by creative practice that decenters the human subject opens the way forward to learn through doing. Here, there is the performative potential of effective encounters where the human body, the environmental, the social, and the cultural are interlinked through grounded and embodied practices. I'm inspired by this quote by Kerasovitis, describing the process of post-qualitative inquiry to quote, a piece of art that momentarily escapes comprehension, cocooning itself in its chaotic nature in order to render a concept sensory, end quote. So I take this as my cue going forward in proposing a transdisciplinary approach to environmental education and art practice and its effective potential within research, embracing the not knowing and the chaotic in itself as a way of discovery that goes beyond conventional humanist qualitative methodology. So We Found a Body is propositional research. It began as an art game, half-made, that was shut down during the 2020 Melbourne lockdowns. It was not originally considered within an educational context, but following Jackson and Mazzei, I am thinking with theory and did not begin with a method. This project began in considering the performative potential of participants interactively moving within an environment to discover their enmeshment within it, and by extension, being galvanized to understand a need to protect it. To explain, the TV crime genre frames this work. It is a serial narrative, albeit experimental in style, where participants follow a digital map on their phones to find different episodes hidden at various outdoor sites. In episode 1, a body has been found. Participants access each episode through their smartphones, where a QR code is hidden within a natural or urban space. Within the digital map are clues guiding them towards the QR code embedded within the architecture of the space. In this regard, the participant also becomes a detective, looking for clues to lead them toward the killer. The body found is not named or shown, but by the final episode, we learn that it is the Earth's body. The killer is all of us in the sense of whom we vote for, where we allow our money to be invested, and what we buy. The potential suspects in the narrative are scared, frustrated, and confused, in the same way that many of us are or can be in the face of the massive harm that we're causing to the environment. The artwork acts like a game of hide and seek. As the participants try to seek different episodes, their phones are digitally corrupted and their screen starts to waver, or error messages appear according to their placement on the map, digitally hiding the narrative. They must realign their phones through arm movements or press interactive buttons which visually mimic the material space they are standing in to uncorrupt their map and get to the next episode. Here, the participant becomes a performer and the environment becomes a material that envelops them and actively changes the digital interface of their phones and the direction they must follow. The physical bodily participation of the participant tangles itself into the story so that the digital and material environments mesh and implicate them as relational and coextensive players in worlds larger than their individual selves. The project functions as a form of urban play in a way that decenters and reconstructs participants so that their bodies, their technology, the narrative they watch, and the environment they play in become intertwined. As Barat states, to quote, "Matter and meaning are not separate elements," end quote. And it is here where we see meaning mattering in new ways. In terms of a practice of research, a critical post-humanist and new materialist perspective understands that the dualism between researcher and participant is flattened. Barat has taught us that agency does not rest in the individual, but takes place through interactions that affect humans and matter in ever-evolving encounters with material conditions and with each other. To quote, "Neither the discursive practices nor material phenomena are ontologically or epistemologically prior. The answers sought in research are entangled in these interactions. What may be pertinent in taking a post-human approach to qualitative inquiry is that there is no singular question, but instead multiple modes of becoming in knowing, or as Barat would call it, knowing in being." My proposition for We Found a Body is that participants, their smartphones, the video narrative and the environment they are within interact to create new ways of knowing in being. Therefore, while the art game is taking place, new materialities and connections are formed where the participant is meshed with the environment they are in. Through their smartphone, through the interactions taking place. The participant's connection to the digital interface is not so much about technology, but their relation to technology. To quote Hookway, open quote, that the user of the interface is also its subject follows the notion of the interface as that which is at once, as that which at once separates and draws together in augmentation, end quote. We see this clearly with We Found a Body, with the connection to the interface as a guiding tool, and also with physical movement and the narrative guidance. For example, the participant can't follow the map until they fix their phone and work with the digital interface, or inversely, until they fix themselves through their movement and their bodily interaction with their phone, which is tied to changing the interface. This interrelationship creates a material co-presencing of the technology, research, environment, and participant. Following Spinoza, Masumi describes affect as the body's capacity to act and to be acted upon, or affect and be affected. Affect is not fixed, but moves in ebbs and flows at different intensities, where the body acts as a passage. As Masumi says, open quote, there is no body, there is a continuous bodying, end quote. From moment to moment, a body is characterized by the capacities it holds. Building artworks bodying the space of the researcher and participant creates an encounter where affect and therefore embodiment takes place according to the various intensities of the moment. Following a politics of affect, situations can be remodulated and participants respond according to speculative experiments in research that can act as guiding principles. Therefore, there is the space for a guiding principle when placing participants within the same environment. For example, an artist's sonic intervention made within a natural environment that pans sound from left to right can direct participants' focus from one point to another. If the sound is electronic amongst trees, participants recognize the interference as mediated by the artist. Here, focus is not upon the researcher and a strict methodology, but the effective encounter taking place through the guiding principle of the artistic intervention. To quote Barat, open quote, the point is not merely that knowledge practices have material consequences, but the practices of knowing are specific material engagements that participate in reconfiguring the world, end quote. The bodies that become bodied are not human bodies alone, but are material discursive entanglements of phenomena in the world. Here, participants are responding to multitudinous conditions that are separate from representationalism, set methods, and the purely linguistic. Artwork used within EE has the potential to turn this attention in different ways where outcomes are not set through inflexible researcher-centered methodologies. This is where force and intensity can instigate new understandings of human, the more than human, and environment, and the constant and changing dynamic flows taking place between them. Representationalism is displaced through the sensation of effective encounters by an artwork, and a knowing in being is taking place beyond what can cognitively be communicated. Using artworks that participants engage with in an environment as part of a research inquiry to engage with the more than human more than researcher participant is a way forward in harnessing post-qualitative inquiry. We Found a Body lends itself to benefits in the transdisciplinary field of EE and art research. The work is not necessarily research unto itself, but can count as or contribute to inquiry in its multiple forms. philosophizing the formation of new models and ways of investigating where the researcher is not central. As Barat aptly notes, to quote, discourse is not a synonym for language. Discourse is not what is said. It is that which constrains and enables what can be said. Art in its very existence is evocative, poetic, relational, and revelatory. It works beyond a reductive cognition and perception. It is often non-representational, and its use within EE is experimental inquiry in the guise of the post-qualitative. There is the opportunity in EE to use art practice such as that discussed here for ethical and political relations and material discursive metamorphoses of understanding and learning. We must look here for the differences, similarities, and echoes across the material, the written and actions in place. With We Found a Body, the participant follows a narrative that activates their bodies to move across the ground. Their feet touch the ground, their hands touch their phones. They see the site in which they stand doubled inside and outside their phone screens. They are both interior and exterior to the game. The intervention created means that they must follow a map to find a killer, and narratively, as they follow each episode, are walking in the land that is figured as murdered. They are both detective and murderer, but must follow the path created by the map, moving in space to be and become multiple things, knowing in being that they are connected to all. And here are my references. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye.
Wonderful. Thanks, Cassandra. And we'll move to our third presentation. And we're pleased to have with us today Scott. Scott has two publications in the special issue, and the presentation that Scott's put together for us today with David Clark and Jamie McPhee represents one of his publications. I'll just want to acknowledge Scott's work in his second publication before I introduce the presentation, where Scott worked with Alistair, who's here with us today, Alistair Stewart and Marcus Morse. So their publication was called Following the Lines in the Landscape, Playing with a Posthuman Pedagogy in Outdoor Environmental Education. So I encourage you to take a look at that paper. And then the conversation we're going to enjoy with Scott, David, and Jamie right now represents some thinking that they presented in this particular article, which was called The Wisp of an Outline, Storying Ontology as Environmental Inquiry, Education. So thanks very much to Scott, David, and Jamie. Let's hear from them.
Right, shall we get into it? Yeah, excellent. Well, welcome everyone that's joining us here today. I'm Scott Dukes and I'm here with David Clark and Jamie McPhee, and we're presenting for the AJEE Research Symposium, where we're going to be talking a little bit about post-qualitative inquiry. So we contributed an article to the special issue, and I also contributed another one with Alistair Stewart and Marcus Morse. And we thought we wouldn't necessarily talk about our article as such, but instead, I guess, have a conversation around this idea of post-qualitative inquiry and use these funky backgrounds that we've got as a provocation for those discussions. So that's our plan of attack for the presentation today. The other thing that will, I guess, kickstart our conversations is a quote that I'll begin with, and it's from St. Pierre, Jackson and Mazzei. And so they wrote that, put simply, we can't tell someone how to do this new work, how to think, how to experiment, how to tip an assemblage towards the plane of immanence. Our best advice is to read, and attend to the encounters in our experiences that demand our attention. If we have something different to think with, we might be able to live on a different plane of thought, a different plane of experience. And so I'm not sure how that quote sits with you two, but for me, this is sort of one quote that I keep returning to in my research, in my inquiry through my doctoral work and my thinking. And it's about experimentation, and that if in doubt in my inquiry process, to read, and look to the encounters that demand my attention. And so that's kind of really kickstarted a lot of my research in the post-qualitative space. How does that sound to you, though?
Yeah, that sounds that sounds about right. The idea of thinking with something in particular is something that was directly what I was trying to do in this project, in this paper that we wrote, and in particular the thing that I was thinking with was you guys. So I was doing this kind of because you both read so much, and I love your writing, and I was trying to let that stuff kind of wash through me and collapse into and crash into my thinking as well, to see what came out. And this isn't necessarily a new idea. This idea of writing is inquiry and not knowing what you're doing before you do it. A bit like what we're doing now. We don't know what we're doing with this presentation. We're just seeing what happens. So yeah, I agree with that idea completely about not knowing before, not being able to prescribe, and then trying to think with something else. And that's a little bit what's going on behind me here, which I can talk about in a second.
Yeah, and I guess that's one of the things that really resonated with me when I came to post-qualitative inquiry. It's that you don't have this set plan in advance, that you let things unfold and emerge and flow and grow, and kind of let the inquiry and the context kind of have a life of itself. And for me, that's what I find really generative in this space, rather than a fixed plan to begin with. Jamie, I know that you're a lover of letting things unfold. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, as you very well know, as I've mentioned before, I was going to speak as if I was the coronavirus. I was actually going to dress up as this. I was going to cut out and get my sons to help me cut out a cardboard piece, put it over my head, and pretend to be the virus with a very high voice, because that's how they speak. But I decided not to do that, and that's why I've got the picture behind me of the coronavirus. But the reason for this, and what Dave was saying and what you were saying, was rather than thinking of who is doing the thinking, I kind of try to think of where the thinking is being articulated, where it's coming from, and how all things can be articulated in life in that kind of animistic kind of perspective. But not just with the writing and now with the talking. I'm just thinking, where's this coming from? The thinking. And it's that quote you just mentioned, that if we have something different to think with, I think that's particularly resonant with me. And as Claire Colebrook said, thinking's not something we do. Thinking happens to us from without. She says there's a necessity to thinking. For the event of thought lies beyond the autonomy of choice. Thinking happens. So, where? Because it's always already begun somewhere. If we don't follow Descartes' idea that thinking starts in the pineal gland from your, non-physical, thought that you just made up, then, where does it come from? Or if we follow Karen Barad's idea that agency is distributed, how does it come together? And do we have any of that choice as well in there? And also, about these questions, what questions are important to ask? What are the right ones? Who knows? Who says what questions are the right ones to ask? That's why I like St. Pierre's work and Martin Jackson's work and Patty Lather's work so much. And they question, well, who says? It was all made up anyway, So rather than think, what does it mean? What are the right questions? I like Deleuze and Guattari's work for this as well. And then that translators forward to Deleuze and Guattari's Thousand Plateaus. I think it's that one anyway. Brian Masumi pointed out the question is not, is it true? But rather, does it work? What new thoughts does it make possible to think? What new emotions does it make possible to feel? What new sensations and perceptions does it open in the body? That is what I'm interested in the most. And I think that's what we are doing and what we did in our paper. And it's what, I think post-qualitative inquiry or thinking makes possible to do, to see what happens. How does it change that? And if I think from a virus's perspective, or attempt to, how does that change things? How does it, what new thoughts, what new emotions does it make possible? So rather than, yeah, who, where, it's, you know, where is it located, you know, and why would that matter, you know?
Yeah, and I guess adding on to that, for me, I've thought about that a little bit as well. St. Pierre writes about challenging conventional humanist qualitative inquiry, and I find that a lot of that conventional humanist inquiry is grounding all knowledge production in humans, in people, and in education, our students, and even in environmental education, still often our students. And I've throughout my work and in this paper tried to think, well, how can I move beyond just the people, but not separate them, not leave them out of it, but include them, but amongst, I guess, this constellation of relations that, you know, we all live and work and play and yeah, what might inquire and what might come forth when, I guess, I take humans out of the centre stage, but look at what's going on amongst that, with that, through that.
I think I was going to say that touches really well on what's going on behind me, actually, because so this is a picture of a will-o'-the-wisp, ignis fatuus, which means a kind of foolish light out on a bog that could lure somebody off their path and attract them. And I kind of started thinking about this during my PhD, and I've just got a slight quote about that from my PhD, where I say, Tim Morton suggests that the whole is less than the sum of its parts. I think this works with being human. The human is less, far less than the sum of its parts. The human is a wisp of an idea of the body environing. The human is a will-o'-the-wisp, a fenfire, ignis fatuus, a bioluminescent apparition produced by microbes, an amorphous haxeity that shouldn't be given too much credence, tempting though it is to follow its warm glow deep into the moor. And the reason that I've got this picture of the will-o'-the-wisp is because, as you guys know, we've had this term wisp in the title of the paper, and a wisp is a kind of bundle of straw or a bundle of threads, which could be used for sweeping or has been used as like a torch. And so will-o'-the-wisp is the idea that there's this guy called Will who's got this wisp, this fire that's leading people out. And I just thought that idea of lines tangling together in that way is very much what's happening in the paper with Scott, your bit on lines, and Jamie, your stuff about there being multiple worlds and ways we can look at things. And those are the two kind of things I was thinking with as I started. And I wouldn't have written the thing I wrote towards the end if it hadn't have been for your way of writing at the beginning. And so to return to your point, Scott, about trying to think beyond the human, but as well as keeping politics relevant. And Jamie, your point about thinking from other perspectives, it's where I think political ecology comes in, and where I think acknowledging that the different ways in which we practice the world have both environmental and political ramifications. The two are never separate, and they're kind of a multiplicity, again, a Deleuzian term that helps us think differently. There's this multiplicity of political ecologies going on in our actions as we do education, as we practice with learners and with our colleagues, and as we do research, and as we act day to day as well. And that's where my thinking kind of went thanks to the way you guys had written.
Yeah, I think that thinking with each other, and that's very Deleuzian as well, isn't it? How he writes with Guattari as well. But again, I'm going to reiterate, who's doing that thinking? Because we're like 34 trillion viruses each, and over 90% bacteria each, and 2 species of mite living on our faces. 2 species, not we've got them anymore. We're an ecosystem unto ourselves. We're a biome. But when we think with each other, if we keep saying, Scott and Dave and Jamie, as if we're these, that's that humanistic model again. That I think we're all attempting at least to try and get out of, which may be impossible, but I think it's in the attempt that where we see differences and lines of flight. So where are we doing this thinking? You know, and you're kind of pertaining to that a little bit, Dave, when you're about, you know, riffing off one another, you know, in our paper, trying to think with us, and it wouldn't be possible. And I wouldn't be saying this now if you hadn't have said that, and if Scott hadn't have said that, and so and it all sort of builds up. But you know, how does that work? But more importantly, thinking with social and environmental equity as our maybe one of our goals here is, what does it do what would be a better way to position ourselves? And it does remind me of Karen Barrad's description of, I think, Sandy Stone's description, Karen Barrad sort of writes about it, description of encountering the physicist Stephen Hawking when he lectured at the University of California. And this is what Sandy Stone said. She said, exactly where, I say to myself, is Hawking? Who is doing the talking up there on the stage? I don't know if you know, just for the audience here or whatever, but Stephen Hawking was a physicist, and you know, he spoke through the voice box to translate what he was saying, but that voice itself was a computer-generated, you know, voice that spoke a little bit like this, that has been used as well in some multiple songs, actually. But yeah, exactly where, I say to myself, is Hawking? Who is doing the talking up there on the stage? In an important sense, Hawking doesn't stop being Hawking at the edge of his body. There's the obvious physical Hawking, vividly outlined by the way our social conditioning teaches us to see a person as a person. But a serious part of Hawking extends into the box in his lap. No box, no discourse. Hawking's intellect becomes a tree falling in the forest with nobody around to hear it. Where does he stop? Where are his edges? And that kind of links, I think, to a lot of post-humanist thinking, but also the new theory of the mind, externalist, extended cognition and that sort of thing. Because, you know, I've got my phone here, and that's where I keep my memory. I don't keep it in my head. You know, I don't try and remember phone numbers. I mean, that would take energy. I could probably do that. I know I can remember one, and that's my own, but I don't know anyone else's. The rest of them are here. So when I try to cognize, I'm not doing it within my brain or within what I perceive of as my sort of corporeal body, my organic body. It's transcranial, as Clark and Chalmers might say. So cognition is a transcranial process, or as Stacey Alamo might say, it's transcorporeal. If we do away with the dualistic notion of the mind and just call it the body.
Jamie, can I just quickly add? I obviously, you know, I completely agree with all of that. And I know you know this as well, but there's also a lineage of concepts at work in who we are. So it's not just the material that we're wrapped up with. There's also the why, like the reasons we are why we are is because thought has operated in this way far beyond and past in history, and has taken turns of warps and been ruptured, and we are thinking the way we're thinking generally now because of what people have thought before us, and that limits us in certain ways. And I think that's what's has happened with qualitative inquiry, as we've been talking, but also perhaps with the way we think about the environment and the way we think about what environmental education is and might be as well.
And those concepts are physical too, though. Those concepts
right.
are ecological and physical, and they have trophic cascades too. And some concepts are keystone species compared to other concepts, and they perform, and it's watching how they perform. Scott, when you asked us to do this with you, for example, the paper in the first place, there are some concepts that perform. You read that quote at the beginning as well, and there are some concepts, thinking with, for example, that perform more strongly than others. So it's looking again at how they perform, what they do, and looking at the trophic cascades that then happen after that. So I like the language of ecology to talk about concepts and how concepts perform quite a lot, actually. So yeah, Dave, you're absolutely right with that
political ecology.
And remembering that it's material though too, it's recognizing its materiality or its material properties even, because if you recognize the material properties in those concepts, you can follow how it performs, and you can then see where that thinking is located.
I think we need to bring Scott in.
Yeah.
I'm really bad at butting in. I've had about 10 different things that I've wanted to say, and one of the other things that I thought I should say is that I think we're over time. I think we've well and truly done our 15 minutes, but I actually didn't set a timer. But I kept wanting to say before we even got to it that the extended cognition idea, and I know that you've worked with that a bit in the past, Jamie, but that sort of came into the other paper I did with Alistair and Marcus, and part of why I've got this image on my background, which is a bunch of lines on a page, which also represents the Mississippi River, but it's multiple courses that change over time. And for me, as I'm an outdoor environmental educator and I take students on river trips, and I often call myself a river educator with the students. Let's follow the river and let the river teach us and see what unfolds and flows there. And so I think there's this kind of external cognition happening all the time for me as an outdoor educator, that it's not me with my baggage of pedagogical approaches that I want to bring along. It's me just going to the river and seeing what we encounter. And I mentioned in that paper with Alistair and Marcus that we might encounter ghosts in the landscape, that we might come across something that, it might just be a tree, but it's so much more than that. There's a whole history in the material, in this living thing that we can kind of read, follow, and then diffract into all these various other kind of, if we think about distributed agency, what has happened to this particular tree? Well, maybe the Yorta people, the traditional custodians of that land, have utilised it for a resource, but in a way that the tree is still living. And there's any number of things that we might be able to run into, encounter, and then inquire into when we're out in a place like a river environment. And it's not that it's wild and pristine and this sublime landscape. It's been, especially the rivers in Australia, drastically altered and appropriated and controlled and regulated for various humanistic purposes. And we all need to eat, but they've also been tamed in a sense as well. And we still travel those places and can learn from them and learn not just about romantic connections with nature, but learn about I guess the dark colonial history of Australia, or look at some of the political ecologies that are surrounded with that, or contemporary water politics and what's going on with the politics around water use and things like that. There's a bunch of politics and political ecologies at play that shape what's going on there. And for me, that's coming back to that externalism idea or extended cognition. It's not just my thoughts, it's my thoughts are there, but it's also the landscape and the things in that place that we can all just inquire into and ask about. And so it's thinking with that place, or thinking with that landscape, and thinking with the ghosts of that place as well. And that's part of the reason why I've got this image on the background, but there's a few other things there. But yeah, we're well over time.
So thinking with
Dave, you wanted to jump in there
rather than over and against it, isn't it? But yeah, you're right, we're over. Sorry. We all get excited. So this is great because the three of us all get excited about the subject matter. Then we go over and sort of take over a little bit as the viruses that we think with, and the rivers that we think with, and the wisps that we think with and of. So we're never on the river, are we, Scott? We're of it. So when we think those thoughts, it's rivery thoughts, I guess, and wispy thoughts and viral thoughts. And so, yeah. Thanks so much, Scott, for inviting us to do this as well. I really appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thank you both for the chat. Great as ever.
Well, thank you very much. What a great performance. I'm laughing at myself, my little pun. Let's move to enjoy a conversation with our colleagues. So we're going to now move to our second discussion. Again, I'll pop the link to the Jamboard in the chat, and you're welcome to use it if you would like. There's no pressure, of course. Perhaps as we go, it would be appropriate to thank our presenters for their efforts. So please join me in a great big thank you. and let's enjoy our conversation. We thought we'd put you back in the same breakout rooms because we're hoping that this helps build our community so that you can deepen your relationships through these discussions. So let's go for 20 minutes and then we'll come back and share our thoughts, and then we'll look to wrap up our wonderful symposium. Thank you, everybody. I hope you enjoy your discussions. Thank you. Thanks for coming back. We're rounding out our symposium from today. I'm going to recapture or explore, I guess, what our discussions were. So perhaps I could go to, maybe we could go backwards and we could start from group 5. So perhaps that's a bit of a surprise, but Cass and Sarah, Sayuri and Jinder, could we go to you and
yes, yes. We didn't do any post-it notes again. We felt like we should uphold our rebellion about not doing that. It wasn't deliberate, I promise, on either occasion. Yeah, so I've been tasked with the kind of summary of our discussions, which is very difficult because we have very interesting ones and then I forget what we've said. So we were chatting kind of about those because both Cassandra and mine and Margaret's presentations were sort of arts-based in some way, and just that idea of thinking differently through the arts and the way that that enables different thinking in a very natural way, and the way that people don't necessarily realize that and what that sort of does, but also the idea of how children embrace so much very naturally and very easily, and that idea of them just being, and something just is, knowledge just is, or being just is, and expression of something just is, and as we get older something happens. We were also really interested in the last presentation and some of the things that came up that sort of provoked some thought for us. So that idea of, can you think beyond human? And whilst that's kind of very difficult, being a human, it's kind of the act of trying to think beyond the human that kind of makes that worthwhile and makes something happen. And that idea of making something happen is really important, or thinking differently, and just trying to think beyond the human. And also that idea of, where is that thinking coming from? We were really taken by those ideas largely, particularly we're all sort of a little bit involved in early childhood and young children kind of learning. But I should just ask Cassandra and Sayuri if they wanted to add anything there. I've probably done quite a poor job of summarising our meanderings.
Oh no, you've done really well. I think that was...
All right, great. All right, we can move on then.
Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Wonderful, brilliant. Well, let's go to room 4, that where Charlotte, Helen, Margaret, Sharon, and Thomas and Chris were exploring ideas. Over to you.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm going to try to summarize some of the things we were talking about, although that suddenly feels like a very long time ago now. We talked about how much we appreciated arts-based methodologies as a wonderful way of exploring this idea of becoming with others. We had a little chat about technology and how interesting it is to think that technology is controlling or guiding the things that we might then notice in the world around us. We talked about this idea of thinking with as a super interesting concept, rather than thinking who did that thinking, but rather than sort of trying to trace it back to a certain place or a time. It feels much more inclusive, much more of a better way of making meaning. And also it just occurred to me that if we're always thinking of who, then we're supporting this kind of egoistic type of thinking, whereas if we're thinking about where it's coming from, it just feels so much more inclusive. We then went on into a little side chat about whether education systems create, perpetuate, or support human exceptionalism. We wonder if younger children are just so much more in tune or have so much more of an innate wisdom in the world around them than perhaps older children, and maybe that's connected to the early years experience and being much more outside, play-based, a bit more inquiry-based perhaps than children who are in classrooms. We also talked about how our exam systems also support that kind of divisive, extractive, binary way of thinking that might actually lead us down more of an anthropocentric attitude and set of behaviours than students who are very much free flow in terms of their indoor classroom environment and outdoor classroom environment. So those are some of our meanderings. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Charlotte, and Group 4. Let's go to Group 3, Annette and Noel, Hilary, Kathleen, Robin, and Yanina.
I'll jump in here, if that's okay, Robin. I know you were dying to do it. We just had a bit of a wander around talking about New Zealand's geography to start with, and we had a discussion about geological time, and yeah, we just talked a little bit about dust, and we talked about Yanina's study, ideas around interaction with water, cosmic dust, what we pay attention to, what we don't, listening and seeing, and we got sidetracked into miasma and various virus theory. And then we segued into what is acceptable as research and the fact that in lots of ways, well, that's always changing, of course, but that we're privileged to be able to think with some of these ideas and be in these spaces. And I think that was about as far as we got, really.
That sounds great. Thanks, Kathleen. And thanks, Group 3. Sorry, 3. Let's go to Group 2. So David, Marianne, Paul, and Scott.
I've been tasked with talking on our behalf, and I tried to get out of it because I obviously have already done some talking a few weeks ago that was played tonight. Trying to wrap up what we're talking about, I guess I'll riff off what Kathleen said there, and that was one point that I touched upon, and I thanked Paul for his openness in, and you as well, Peter, in accepting that abstract with Dave and Jamie, because it was a bit of a risk, and we're going out on a limb, we felt, with the abstract and then with the paper as well. And I think that like taking that risk enabled us to kind of do something that we hadn't done separately before, and working collectively enabled us to do that. But it was also this special issue and the editors that allowed us to be able to do that. And I 100% agree with you, Kathleen, that there's a privilege that comes with that. And so thank you to AJEE and you, Peter and Paul, for letting us go out on a limb. But there's something that when, like our presentation, when you sort of let things unfold and don't force things and don't have things too pre-planned, that is generative, and that's what we're trying to get across in the presentation. But that's some of the things that we spoke about in our group, and we spoke a little bit about the background, about what prompted my research, but then also the influences of possibly others' research. I feel like I'm really mincing my words and not coming across very well in what we spoke about. Can anyone from my group step in and help me out on a pertinent or poignant point? Because I feel like I'm just talking about myself, which isn't necessary.
No. We did talk a lot about your presentation, so that was really good. So, no, you're doing a good job, Scott.
Is there something you can tell us about the image? I'm curious about that.
Oh, I put that in because it reminded me of the image that it's in a book chapter of a recent book, but Kathleen's, looking at that merging of technologies. It was actually when I was at the zoo with my grandchild looking at the orangutan, and I took the picture, and it's half me with my phone and half the orangutan in the background. So it was sort of very thought-provoking, particularly about the orangutan and what's happening with their habitat and me in freedom and this orangutan in a cage. And, it just brought all those things to mind, where the human and orangutan became one with the digital technologies just for that second.
Excellent, thank you. Just in light of time, I think we'll move to group one. So Alistair, Jane, Russell and Sandra.
Sandra, do you want to have a go on this?
Sorry, yeah, sure, I was just muted. So we began that conversation with the 3 really good talks: Thinking with Fire, I Found the Body, and Where is Thought Located? No, it was Will of the Wisp. No, the Wisp of that one. And it was wonderful. And we were, we ended up talking about and taking on the question of where is thought located, and we arrived at, in the end, as recognizing that question is actually the essence of post-qualitative inquiry, which is exactly what was the outcome of Scott's group. But yeah, if we accept, and then we talked a bit about Aboriginal ways and also different post-qualitative ways of engaging with place and becoming conscious of that, where thought is located. And, as Marlika was talking about with the crocodile this morning in the film, if you accept that there is possibility, you may observe response. Like, may I communicate with river? Well, if you get rid of the idea that, no, I cannot communicate with river, then you can entertain the possibilities that a river is communicative and communicable, and there is that response ability. We all have the ability to respond. So that's kind of somehow in the middle of all of this. The playfulness and joy involved in recognizing the extended nature of thought and experience. It opens up possibilities beyond normal constraints. And the coalescing of people's geographies and geometries in their heads, what can become possible with various intersections and meanderings and opportunities. And I think maybe Alistair said at one point, we are constrained by our forms of representation. And, one question that I don't think we answered well is, how can arts-based practices enable the implications of this response ability that we all have, the communicability? How can that sort of represent? Is that the right question, Peter? How can that represent? Or I don't think we've answered that well, other than maybe what Marianne was just talking about then, where they all come together, the overlaps. So yeah, and Russell said towards the end, maybe one of the challenges is getting kids to express more of their personhood in, like the book Becoming Salmon, Becoming Human. To enable the salmon to be salmon, we have to be more human. That's what it means to me. Thank you. And do we have anything else to say, Russell and
Well, I'm actually going to shut you off there. I'm sorry about that, but thank you, Sandra, very much for that great representation of a good conversation. We are in our closing moments, but I wanted to first of all just do a great thank you to those final 3 presentations. Thank you for your efforts in pre-recording to all of our presenters today, and thank you to everyone for coming along for such a great discussion. So round of applause to our presenters again, please. We were very keen to leave you with some thoughts about where AJEE is going, and it's fine that we only have a minute to do this, because I think my colleagues and I will be happy if we rush through this a little bit. Please know that we're working to enact our diversity, inclusivity and equity policy. We're looking to continue to create our community of environmental education researchers in, whatever forms we're taking our work. We have some work to do around an awards practice. Yesterday was our AGM for A squared E squared, and we presented 2 awards, which was very exciting, but we've got more work to do in that space. We've got some work to do around our reviewer practices, and we're hoping to push to 5 issues a volume, which would be quite exciting. And of course, we are volume 38 this year. So in 2 years' time, we'll be working on volume 40, AJEE's 40th year of being representative of our field. And three important issues that are working towards celebrating that are the 3 listed here. And I'm very sorry that we don't have a lot of time to hear from each of the presenters. Perhaps I won't actually throw to each of them, but please know that the first one on the list, Indigenous Philosophy in Environmental Education, relearning how to love, feel, hear and live with place, is close. The call has been out for a while. The call is now closed and the manuscripts are in production. And we have 2 other very exciting special issues coming in the next little while. With that, I'm very keen to wrap up on time, but I wanted to end by saying if you've got any questions about AJEE, please do forward them to me. I'd like to thank the AJEE editorial executive for coming along for the ride, for being involved and for being such a great group to work with. Thank you to the AJEE editorial board and of course Cambridge University Press, specifically Jamie and Vicky. They've worked for us this time in being able to launch the issue just today. So that was really exciting. I'd like to acknowledge and thank and congratulate all the authors of this amazing special issue. And of course, I want to thank Paul. Paul, you're amazing to work with. I've really enjoyed the journey, and I'd like to hand over to you to give you the last voice today.
Well, thank you very much. It's 2 o'clock in the morning and I'm not going to speak for very long, so don't worry, folks. No, I'm very pleased to be involved, to have been involved in this special issue. So many great people that I've met and learned to and work with and read their papers. I'm looking forward to more of the same in the upcoming special issue that I'm probably going to be more involved in. And enjoyed the conversation tonight. We had some very good articulations of the issues that we're facing. We could have, pushed it a little further politically, but that'll come in the next in one of the next special issues.
And wonderful. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming. And yes, thank you, Annette. We look forward to seeing you at the next one.
Yes.
Wish you a great night. And Paul, well done. That's a solid effort.
We should say a well done to you for coordinating all of this. Thank you.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone.